Imagine thinking you've got it all figured out, until one tiny mistake shatters everything. My wife was the love of my life, or so I thought. Then one random letter flipped my world upside down. Turns out, she'd been lying for months, living a double life right under my nose. And it wasn't just the lies. It was who she was lying with. This isn't your average breakup story. This is a deep dive into betrayal, revenge, and finding out who's got your back when life blindsides you. If you think you know where this goes, think again. It was around 10 in the morning when the doorbell rang. I paused mid-bite, setting down my fork, and wondered who it could be. I was not expecting anyone, but a part of me hoped it might be my wife returning early from her business trip. I shook my head. No, she was scheduled to come back on Sunday evening. After a quick sigh, I pushed back my chair, got up, and made my way to the door. As I opened it, I was met with the sight of a young woman, standing there with a smile that seemed both warm and professionally rehearsed. "Hello, are you Mr. Victor?" she asked. "Yes, that's me," I replied, a little curious. She handed me an envelope. "You have a registered letter. Mind signing here?" "Who sent it?" I asked, as I scribbled my signature on her clipboard. She tilted her head slightly. "In popular terms, it's called a letter of fortune," she said with a wry smile. "You know, from the DMV. Did I go over the speed limit?" I asked, feeling both amused and a bit worried. "Something like that. But I do not know the details," she answered politely. With the letter in hand, I thanked her, watched her leave, and then returned to my kitchen, where my breakfast sat half-finished on the table. Taking another few bites, I finally opened the letter, preparing myself for the usual traffic fine or notification. My eyes scanned the first few lines, and my brow furrowed. It was indeed from the DMV, but the details took me aback. Apparently, I had been recorded making an illegal turn about a month ago. The date and time were clearly stated, along with the location, a motel parking lot on the outskirts of town. Attached were also a couple of grainy photos. I squinted, looking at the figures in the car. Suddenly, everything in me froze. The person in the passenger seat was unmistakably my wife. I felt a strange wave of confusion and disbelief. My mind started connecting the dots, and it hit me hard. That was during one of her supposed business trips. She was not even supposed to be in town. My pulse quickened as I scanned the photos again and checked the date. My hands felt cold, and I put down the letter, reaching for my phone. Opening the call history, I checked back a month. Yes, I remembered it clearly now. She had left town 2 days after this incident was recorded. Taking a deep breath, I set the phone down, trying to steady myself. A strange numbness washed over me. In that moment, the weight of 1,000 questions seemed to hang in the air, yet none of them formed fully in my mind. I needed to understand what was happening, even if it felt like I already knew. I dressed quickly, grabbed my keys, and within an hour, I was at that motel parking lot, standing exactly where the incident supposedly happened. The motel was unassuming, a quiet place with a lot of spots to stay out of view. I scanned the rows of cars, feeling more determined than I ever had before. That parking spot, the one from the photos, stood out as if it held secrets only I was meant to uncover. My car was there, a recent purchase that had been registered in my name, yet driven primarily by my wife. Months earlier, she had brought up the idea of us getting a second car. She needed something for her frequent business trips, as she had called them. Despite a recent cooling in our relationship, I agreed, hoping the gesture would perhaps bring us closer, as naive as that may have been in retrospect. I had not even told her I held a driver's license myself. She simply assumed the car was hers to use. During these supposed trips, she parked the car on her company's grounds, claiming it was safer there. And every time she returned on Sunday, she would drive back in it, as if from the office. Yet, as I realized now, that car, supposedly mine, was being used for something entirely different. Then there was the man. I knew him well. His name was Stan, the executive director of her company. My wife, whom I'll call Nancy for now, had introduced me to Stan and his wife Christine on several occasions. We had even visited their home a few times, and they had joined us for dinner once or twice. Stan and Christine lived well. A spacious apartment in a high-rise, lavish dinners, and a taste for life's finer things. Christine's sister, Liz, and her young daughter, Veronica, lived with them too, since Liz had recently gone through a tough divorce. Christine was endlessly devoted to her niece and sister, despite Stan's clear disdain for poor relatives, as he often put it. I thought about Christine now, wondering if she knew what was happening right under her roof. Maybe she did. Maybe she had suspected, just as I had unconsciously felt something was off with Nancy lately. Trying to absorb everything I had just discovered, I took a seat on a nearby bench, when suddenly a voice called my name. "Vic? That you?" I looked up to see an old friend, Art, grinning as he approached. "Art," I managed, standing up to greet him. We had not seen each other in years, and the timing of our meeting felt almost surreal. "What brings you here?" he asked, taking a seat beside me. I looked around, still processing everything. "Actually, I came here to think. I just decided I'm getting a divorce." Art's face turned serious. "That bad, huh? Want to talk about it?" I told him everything in a few short sentences, trying to keep my voice steady. I expected him to be shocked, maybe even speechless, but instead, he just nodded and sighed. "So she's been meeting him here on weekends," he said almost too calmly. "You know, I own this place. Well, this and a few more around town." I looked at him, astonished. "You own this motel?" He chuckled, nodding. "Capitalism, my friend." Then, seeing my expression, he put a hand on my shoulder. "Look, Vic, don't make any rash moves. Think everything through before you act. You want to be clear on what's next." "Yeah, I get it." I nodded, trying to settle the storm inside me. I was furious, hurt, but above all, determined. "But I'm definitely not giving her the car." Art laughed. "Good call. And what about your place?" "Technically, it's hers. She already owned it before we got married. I moved in afterward." "Then she has no claim on the car, right?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "Not a chance," I answered firmly. Art sighed, taking it all in. "So, what's your next move? If you need a place to stay, I have a nearly finished cottage out by the lake. It's 2 stories, and you're welcome to use it until you sort everything out. And don't worry, my wife has no idea it exists." I felt a strange gratitude then, knowing I had a friend willing to help when I needed it the most. Art was right. I could not just jump into action without thinking. But I also knew one thing for sure. I was not about to let Nancy continue using me like this. As we drove to the lake cottage, Art and I kept talking, both about the house and the betrayal. I felt a strange comfort knowing that he, too, had faced his own battles in relationships. A few years back, he went through a messy divorce with his ex-wife, who had quietly siphoned money from his motel business to help a boyfriend open a coffee shop. It all blew up in her face, but by then Art had made up his mind. He would never let his guard down like that again. Once we arrived, I took a look around the cottage. Art had spared no expense. The place was nearly finished, with high ceilings, a spacious kitchen, a grand master bedroom, and a big bay window that looked out over the lake. There was even a small office area where I could focus if needed. Art grinned, seeing my approval. "Not too shabby, right? You know, I was going to surprise my wife with it for Christmas, but now I think I'll keep it a secret for a while longer." He winked, handing me the keys. "Mi casa es su casa, my friend. Stay as long as you need." We spent the rest of the afternoon setting up a plan. Art advised me to reach out to Christine, Stan's wife. "The 2 of you need to be on the same page," he said firmly. "If you both want the same thing, it'll be easier to get the results you need in court. And, if I may say, she deserves to know the truth." It was true. Christine had always been warm to me, and despite everything, I felt guilty about what she might be going through. I knew I had to tell her, even if it was not easy. Before I left, Art made one last suggestion. "Take it easy with her. Be gentle. And make sure she feels she has a friend in all this." The next day, I arrived at Christine's apartment building. As I stood outside, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. There was no guarantee she would even want to talk to me, much less join forces. But as I knocked on the door and waited, I remembered the look in her eyes whenever Stan mentioned another business trip. She knew something was off. She had probably known it for longer than I had suspected anything. Christine opened the door, surprised to see me. "Victor, this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" I looked down for a moment, gathering my words. "Christine, I am sorry to come here like this, but there's something you need to know. It's about Stan and Nancy." She looked at me, clearly piecing together my intentions, and without a word, she stepped back, letting me in. We sat down in her kitchen and I told her everything about the letter of fortune, the photos and the motel. She listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each word. When I finished, she was silent for a moment, her hands shaking slightly as she held onto her mug. "I always had a feeling," she whispered, almost to herself. "There were signs, little things here and there. I didn't want to believe it. Liz, my sister, she always told me Stan was hiding something, but I thought she was just, I don't know, overprotective." "I am so sorry, Christine," I said, feeling the weight of my words. She took a deep breath and looked up at me, her eyes full of determination. "Victor, thank you for telling me. I appreciate the honesty. But now I need to know what we are going to do about it." Together, we decided to gather any evidence we could. Art had suggested I get legal advice, and Christine agreed, insisting we should not make a move until we had all the necessary information. As much as we both wanted to confront them, we knew it was not time. Instead, we started planning, going over every detail of how we would approach the divorce process. Christine even mentioned that she had a lawyer friend who specialized in family law. Over the next few days, things started to fall into place. Christine and I agreed to meet with her friend, Kate, a sharp and no-nonsense lawyer with a reputation for handling complicated divorce cases. She listened to our story with a quiet intensity, taking notes and occasionally nodding. "Here's the deal," she finally said, leaning forward. "You both have options, but it's important to go in knowing exactly what you want out of this. Victor, it sounds like you want to be free from Nancy, correct?" I nodded, feeling a surge of relief just at the thought of it. "Good. And Christine, it sounds like you want to hold Stan accountable for what he has done, not just personally but financially. Am I right?" Christine nodded, her jaw set. "I want him to understand that he cannot just toss me aside. This company, it was my father's. He built it up from nothing. Stan came in when we got married, and I trusted him. But it's time he learns that he cannot take it all for granted." Kate nodded approvingly. "Then let's start with the evidence. Victor, do you have access to Nancy's financial records?" "I might," I said, a bit hesitant. "But I would have to be careful. She has never shared much about her accounts, but I have seen statements lying around the house." Kate smiled slightly. "That is more than enough. Look for anything suspicious, bank transfers, hidden accounts, anything that might suggest she was funneling money. Same goes for you, Christine. Any record of Stan using company funds for personal expenses would be helpful." The plan was becoming clearer by the minute. Kate's determination and professionalism were reassuring, and I could tell Christine felt the same way. After the meeting, she walked with me to my car, a look of resolve in her eyes. "I never thought I would be here, you know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I knew Stan. We've built so much together, or at least I thought we had. But now, it feels like I'm just waking up." I reached out, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You are stronger than you think, Christine. We'll get through this. Together." As the days went by, I managed to find more details that Nancy had hidden from me. Little bits of her life I had not been privy to. Old receipts, hotel reservations, strange deposits. Everything started to fall into place. My anger turned into focus, and the feeling of betrayal gave way to a kind of grim determination. If she thought she could have it all and leave me in the dust, she was about to see a very different side of me. One evening, Christine called. She sounded tired, but there was a hint of excitement in her voice. "Victor, I have found something. I went through some of Stan's files, the ones he had kept in a locked drawer in his office. Turns out he was sending money to a separate company under someone else's name, and the address listed. It's a rundown apartment miles from here. Something is definitely going on. The news only fueled my resolve. It felt like every piece of evidence was falling into place, like a puzzle I had not even known existed. I promised Christine we would get justice for both of us, no matter how long it took. That weekend, Christine suggested we meet again, this time with Art, who was just as invested in the outcome as we were. He reserved a private room at his favorite restaurant, and by the time we arrived, he had already set up everything, from the appetizers to a full meal. Art looked at both of us as we sat down, his face serious. "All right, folks, this is it. You have a strong case, and you have more than enough to move forward. But I want to know one thing. Are you both ready for what's coming?" Christine and I exchanged a look, each of us feeling the weight of his question. But we both nodded, resolute. "Then let's make sure we do this right," Art said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings and long overdue endings." As we clinked our glasses, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm was not over, but at least now I was not facing it alone. The wheels were set in motion. With each passing day, Christine and I gathered more evidence. Each discovery a new layer peeling back the lies we had lived under for so long. I was beginning to see just how much my wife had hidden from me, and Christine felt the same about Stan. We were like partners in an unspoken pact, driven by a need for justice, if not closure. One night, I was going through Nancy's things while she was away on yet another business trip. I found an old phone in the back of her closet, buried under a pile of winter coats she rarely wore. I powered it on, wondering if it would even have anything useful left on it. Surprisingly, it did. Texts, photos, even saved voice messages. Every piece was another reminder of how completely I had been deceived. The texts were from Stan, confirming dates and locations for their weekend rendezvous. I found myself reading them over and over, feeling the anger rise with each line. How casual they were, how easily they discussed what they would do, and where they would go with no thought of the people they were betraying. But my heart dropped when I reached the last batch of messages. They were recent, from just a few days ago, and one of them revealed that Nancy had something to tell me when she returned. My stomach twisted as I read it. "We need to talk when I get back. It is about the baby." For a moment I thought I might be seeing things. Baby? I read it again, and then again until the words began to blur together. My mind went into overdrive. Was she pregnant? And if she was, whose child was it? Mine? Stan's? Every scenario that played out in my head made me feel more lost, more betrayed. I had never felt so helpless in my life. And yet, a strange determination took over. I needed to confront her, to finally bring all of this to light, and see where we stood. Christine called the next morning, her voice tense. She could tell something was different, and it did not take long for her to ask what was wrong. I explained about the texts, about the mention of a baby, and there was silence on the other end of the line. "Victor, I do not even know what to say. That is beyond anything I expected," she finally said, her voice heavy. "Are you all right?" "No," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "But I will be. I have to be." We made a plan to meet later that week with Kate, our lawyer. Christine had discovered more evidence that implicated Stan in financial fraud at her father's company, and Kate wanted us to review everything together before we filed. It was clear now that Stan had not only betrayed Christine emotionally, but he had taken advantage of her trust in their business as well. We were both going to walk away from these marriages, but not before they paid for the damage they had done. The night before our meeting, Nancy returned home. I was waiting for her, sitting on the couch with the lights dimmed, her phone and the evidence we had gathered in a neat pile on the coffee table. She walked in, paused, and looked at me with that fake smile I had grown to recognize all too well. "Victor, what are you doing sitting here in the dark?" she asked, her voice soft, almost too casual. I gestured to the couch across from me. "Sit down, Nancy. We need to talk." Her face fell slightly, but she complied, sitting down and crossing her legs. "All right, what is this about?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It is about the trips, the phone, and the baby you are apparently planning to tell me about. I kept my gaze steady, watching her reaction. She froze, her eyes widening. I could see the gears turning in her mind as she tried to come up with a response. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. I was going to tell you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You were going to tell me? I repeated, unable to keep the bitterness out of my tone. Were you planning to tell me about the affair too? Or just the baby? She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Victor, I am sorry. I made a mistake. A mistake. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. This was not just a mistake, Nancy. This was calculated. You lied to me, used me, and now you are carrying a child that may not even be mine. Her face crumpled, but I could not feel sympathy for her. She had brought this upon herself, and we both knew it. I waited for her to speak, to explain, to give me something that could help me understand how we had ended up here. Victor, I never wanted to hurt you, she said softly. It just happened. I thought, maybe things would go back to the way they were if I could just figure out what I wanted. And what is that? I asked, the words sharp and cold. What do you want, Nancy? She was silent for a long moment, looking down at her hands. I do not know, she finally admitted. I thought maybe this child could be a new beginning. For us. I laughed, the sound harsh and empty. A new beginning? You are having Stan's child, and you think that is supposed to bring us closer. She looked away, tears in her eyes. I could see that she was genuinely distressed, but it did not matter anymore. The damage was done and there was no going back. I am filing for divorce, Nancy, I said quietly, the words feeling both liberating and final. And I am taking the car. You can keep the apartment, but that is it. She looked up, shocked. Victor, please, let us not rush into this. We can work through it. We have been through so much together. I shook my head. No, Nancy, we have been through a lot, but not this. This is where it ends. She sat there, stunned. As I got up, grabbing my keys and heading toward the door. I could hear her start to cry, but I kept walking, not letting myself look back. This was not the woman I thought I had married, and I knew that I could not stay with her, not after everything that had happened. I spent the night at the lake cottage, staring out over the water and trying to make sense of everything. The pain was still there, raw and heavy, but I felt a strange peace too, knowing that I had finally put an end to the lies. The next morning, I met with Christine and Kate. Christine's face was pale, but her eyes were steady. She reached out, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. We are almost there, Victor, she said softly. One more step and we will be free. Kate went over the final paperwork, laying out our options and explaining what to expect once we filed. It was a surreal experience, sitting there with Christine, planning our divorces from the people we had once loved. But there was a strange sense of solidarity too, a shared strength that gave us both the courage to keep going. As we left the office, Christine and I walked in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, she stopped, looking at me with a small, sad smile. Thank you, Victor, for everything. I nodded, feeling the weight of everything we had been through together. You are welcome, and thank you too, Christine. I could not have done this without you. We parted ways, both of us heading toward our new lives, free from the lies and betrayal that had once defined our worlds. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful, ready to move forward and leave the past behind. The divorce filings went through quietly at first. Christine and I kept in close contact, supporting each other as we braced for the inevitable confrontations with Nancy and Stan. Days turned into weeks, and the tension grew, as if we were both waiting for the other shoe to drop. The calm before the storm, as they say. Then, one evening, I received a call from Art. He sounded serious, even more so than usual. Victor, I thought you should know that Stan found out about the financial audit Christine has launched at the company. He's furious, threatening all sorts of things. I don't know what his next move is, but be careful. I thanked him, hanging up and pacing the room, my mind racing. Stan was a smart man. He wouldn't take this lying down, and I had a feeling that whatever he was planning, it wouldn't be pretty. I debated calling Christine to warn her, but I knew she was already aware of the risks. Instead, I stayed up late, watching the clock tick by, feeling a strange mix of dread and determination. This was the life I had chosen now, and there was no turning back. The next day, Christine called me, her voice shaky. "Victor, he's pushing back hard. I just left a meeting with the board, and Stan is trying to block the audit. He's even implying that I'm mentally unfit to run the company and that I'm just out for revenge. It's absurd." "Stay calm, Christine. He's just trying to scare you," I reassured her. "He knows his lies are finally catching up with him, and he's grasping at straws." She sighed, sounding exhausted. "I know. It's just, I thought I knew this man. I thought he had some decency left. But the person I'm dealing with now feels like a complete stranger. We'll get through this," I promised. "And you don't have to do it alone." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Stan escalated his attacks, making vague threats and even showing up unannounced at Christine's office, trying to intimidate her into dropping the audit. Christine stayed strong, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. Each time we met, she looked more worn out, but her resolve was unwavering. One evening, I decided to surprise her with dinner. I picked up some takeout from her favorite restaurant and showed up at her office, hoping to lift her spirits. She was alone, sitting at her desk with stacks of papers spread out before her, her expression distant. "Surprise," I said, holding up the bags of food. "I thought you might need a break." She looked up, a tired smile spreading across her face. "Victor, you didn't have to do this." "I know," I said, setting the bags down on her desk. "But I wanted to. We're in this together, remember?" She nodded, and we ate in silence for a while, the quiet companionship comforting in a way words couldn't be. As we finished, she set her fork down and looked at me, her expression serious. "Victor, do you ever wonder if we're making the right choice? I mean, tearing everything down, letting go of people we once cared about." I thought about her question, the weight of it settling over me. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But then I remember that we tried everything. We gave them every chance and they made their choices. Now it's time for us to make ours." She nodded slowly, a look of acceptance in her eyes. "You're right. We can't keep holding on to something that's already broken." As we cleared away the food containers, she hesitated, then reached for my hand. Her touch was gentle, and for a moment, we just sat there, the silence around us speaking louder than words. It was a connection born from shared pain, from understanding each other in a way no one else could. Before I left, she hugged me tightly, and I felt a flicker of something more than friendship. But I pushed it aside, knowing it wasn't the time. We both had wounds to heal, and I wasn't about to complicate things further. Still, that moment lingered in my mind, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was a glimmer of hope. The next morning, I received a text from Christine. "Stan's lawyer contacted me. He wants to negotiate." I felt a surge of relief, but also a sense of caution. This could mean a lot of things, and I knew we couldn't let our guard down. Christine and I met with Kate later that day, going over every possible angle. Stan's lawyer was known for being ruthless, and we knew we were in for a fight. When we finally met with Stan and his lawyer, the tension was palpable. Stan sat across from us, his expression smug and unrepentant. He looked at Christine with a mocking smile, as if he still thought he could manipulate her. "So," he began, leaning back in his chair, "Christine, don't you think this has gone far enough? We're tearing this family apart over a simple misunderstanding." Christine met his gaze, her voice steady. "This isn't a misunderstanding, Stan. You betrayed me both personally and professionally. This company was my father's legacy, and you used it for your own selfish gain." He smirked, shrugging. "Oh, come on. It was just business. You of all people should understand that." Kate leaned forward, her tone cold. "Mr. Anderson, this business you're referring to has serious legal implications. We have documented evidence of financial misconduct and misuse of company funds, which we are prepared to present in court if necessary." Stan's smug expression faltered for a moment, and I could see the calculation in his eyes as he weighed his options. But his lawyer, a slick, overconfident man in a designer suit, interrupted. "Let's not be hasty, shall we? We're all reasonable people here. Perhaps there's a way we can resolve this without dragging everyone through a lengthy court process." Christine shook her head. "There's only one way this ends, Stan. You resign from the company, transfer all shares back to me, and we settle the financial liabilities you've incurred on my behalf. That's the only way I'll even consider not pursuing this in court." Stan's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought he might lash out. But then he smiled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "All right, Christine, have it your way. But don't think I'll go down without a fight. You're not the only one who knows how to play this game." We left the meeting with a tentative agreement, but I could tell Christine was rattled. She had won the first round, but it was clear Stan wasn't going to back down easily. As we walked out of the building, she turned to me, a mix of relief and fear in her eyes. "Do you think he'll really go through with it?" she asked quietly. I shrugged, trying to reassure her. "I think he'll try to drag this out as long as he can, but in the end, he doesn't have a choice. You have the law on your side, Christine. He can't win this." She nodded, but I could tell she was still shaken. The fight had taken its toll on her, and I knew that even after everything was settled, it would take time for her to rebuild her life. But at least now, she had a chance to start fresh, to reclaim what was rightfully hers. That night, I lay awake in the lake cottage, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything we had been through. I thought about Nancy, about how far she had strayed from the person I had once loved. Part of me still felt a lingering sadness, a sense of loss that I couldn't shake. But I knew that letting go was the only way forward. In the early hours of the morning, I finally fell asleep, the weight of the past slowly lifting as I drifted off. When I woke, the sun was shining through the windows, casting a warm glow over the room. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet assurance that no matter what happened, I was on the right path. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and tense negotiations. Christine and I leaned on each other for support, finding strength in our shared resolve. There were moments when it felt overwhelming, but we kept going, driven by a need for closure and justice. Then, one evening, as we were finalizing the last details of our divorces, Christine surprised me. She invited me over to her apartment, saying she wanted to celebrate the end of a long and painful journey. I hesitated, but something in her voice made me say yes. When I arrived, she greeted me with a warm smile, a glass of wine in each hand. We toasted to new beginnings, to freedom, and to the strength we had found in each other. As the night wore on, we talked about everything: our fears, our hopes, and the future we were finally free to shape. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life beyond the hurt, a life where I could be happy again. As I looked at Christine, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in that hope. Our divorces became final not long after that night, bringing with them a profound sense of relief. The legal battles, the strained meetings, and the endless arguments were finally over. I felt like I could breathe again, free from the weight that had suffocated me for so long. Christine and I remained close, both of us navigating our newfound freedom with a tentative optimism. But, of course, nothing in life is that simple. Despite my attempts to distance myself from the past, there were still ties that pulled me back. Nancy reached out more than once, leaving voicemails and sending long, apologetic text messages that alternated between anger, regret, and pleas for forgiveness. I tried to ignore them, blocking her number and focusing on moving forward, but the pain lingered. Breaking free from years of shared memories wasn't as easy as I had hoped. One day, while I was at Art's motel going over some final paperwork, Nancy showed up unannounced. I was in the middle of a meeting with Art when she walked in, her face pale and her expression desperate. "Victor, please, we need to talk," she said, her voice wavering. Art looked at me, raising an eyebrow. "Want me to give you some space?" I shook my head, not wanting to give her the satisfaction. "There's nothing left to talk about, Nancy. We've said everything that needs to be said. She glanced at Art as if silently asking for privacy, but he stayed seated, his expression unreadable. I admired his silent support. He knew this wasn't easy for me. Victor, I know I messed up, she continued, her voice cracking. I know I hurt you, and I can never take that back. But can you please listen to me? Just once. I sighed, the anger simmering beneath the surface. Fine. Say what you need to say, and then leave. She took a deep breath, looking down at her hands. I wanted to tell you about the baby. I found out a few weeks ago that it wasn't Stan's. It's yours. I froze, the words hanging in the air between us. Part of me wanted to believe her, to feel the pull of that connection. But I knew better. She had lied to me too many times before, and I wasn't about to let myself be manipulated again. Nancy, whether or not the baby is mine doesn't change what you did, I said, my voice cold. You betrayed me. You lied, you cheated, and you used me. Nothing will make that right. Her face crumpled, and I saw the tears welling up in her eyes. I know, Victor. I know I can't change the past. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. I know that probably doesn't mean anything now, but it's the truth. I stood up, my patience wearing thin. I'm sorry, Nancy, but it's too late. I have moved on. You should too. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me with a strange sense of finality. I felt Art's hand on my shoulder, grounding me, and I realized that I was truly done with her. The chapter was closed, and I could finally put it behind me. In the days that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. I threw myself into my work, finding purpose in the stability and routine. Christine and I continued to see each other, our friendship evolving into something deeper and more meaningful. We spent long evenings talking, laughing, and dreaming about the future, each of us finding solace in the other's company. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch of the lake cottage, watching the sunset over the water, Christine turned to me, her expression thoughtful. Victor, do you ever wonder if we went through all of this for a reason? Like maybe, in some strange way, it was all meant to lead us here. I looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. Maybe. I don't know. But I do know that I wouldn't have gotten through it without you. She smiled, reaching out to take my hand. Same here. I never thought I'd find peace after everything Stan put me through. But being with you, it feels like a new beginning. We sat in comfortable silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. I realized then how grateful I was for her presence in my life. She had become my anchor, the person who understood me in a way no one else ever had. Our bond continued to deepen over the following months, and one day, I found myself wondering if this was what love was supposed to feel like. Quiet, steady, and built on trust. I knew that I didn't want to lose her, and I sensed that she felt the same. Then, one afternoon, Christine received a call that would shatter our peace. It was from her lawyer, Kate, who had just received word that Stan was planning to contest the divorce settlement. He claimed that Christine had no right to the company and that he was entitled to a significant portion of her assets. It was a last-ditch effort, a desperate attempt to hold onto the life he had built on lies and manipulation. Christine was furious, and I could see the hurt in her eyes as she relayed the news. He's just trying to drag this out, to make my life as miserable as possible, she said, her voice trembling. I took her hands in mine, trying to reassure her. He's grasping at straws, Christine. He knows he's lost, and this is his way of lashing out. We'll fight this together, just like we have fought everything else. Kate advised us to prepare for a drawn-out legal battle, warning that Stan would likely use every trick in the book to complicate things. Christine and I braced ourselves, knowing that the coming months would be difficult. But our resolve was unshakable. We weren't going to let him win. The trial was grueling, a constant tug-of-war that left us both drained. Stan's lawyer attempted to paint Christine as unstable, unfit to run the company, and even accused her of manipulating me into supporting her. The courtroom became a battlefield, each day bringing new challenges and frustrations. But Christine held her head high, her strength unwavering. One day, During a break in the proceedings, Stan approached us outside the courtroom. He was smug, his confidence infuriating. "Christine, you're making a fool of yourself," he sneered. "All of this just to spite me? You're pathetic."